Also, I could have won a game of Magic, but I didn't read what one of my key cards
Yeah,
was.
that was silly.
Miriam makes double legendaries.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it doesn't matter.
I had a Ganax, which makes treasures every time a dragon comes in.
You should have had a second one that was
Should have
making
had a second
2,
one.
and then they combo off each other,
Yeah.
making 4. Yeah. You silly goose.
Fucking idiot. Should have had double Thrakus.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I had
Quadruple power,
I
yeah.
had all the win cons, and I put them in the bin because I was like, well, that seems egregious. Of course they die.
Oh, no. Bless your cottons.
Yeah.
Mirren's broken.
Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we're talking about all things Magic, flavour design, and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And we are not talking about Dragonstorm. I feel naked. I feel afraid. The set hasn't released yet, and we're already moving on to something else.
Like the 8th set about dragons.
But it was our own choice to do this.
It was, yeah. We were like, hey, let's not tie ourselves down, unlike a kangaroo.
But spring is here.
It is.
It's a time for renewal.
It is. The sun is bright, cresting over the horizon.
So, like all good little Catholic boys, like I am, it's time to talk about death.
Yes, exactly. Oh, Easter is coming up.
That's theologically accurate, what I just said. Because he died and rose again.
He did.
I'm not offending anyone. I was genuinely raised Catholic.
Yeah, you weren't re-raised Catholic, though. You haven't died yet.
Nor was Jesus, technically.
No. That's okay. But Easter time, death and rebirth. And so we thought we'd talk, weird enough, not even deliberately, but kind of accurately.
So what are we talking about today?
Reanimation.
Way!
Yeah. It's things going from the graveyard zone to the battlefield zone, maybe your hand zone, but things that have been deaded being undeaded.
That feels so wrong in the mouth for you to say battlefield zone, graveyard zone. No.
Well,
they are zones because they change zones.
Yeah.
You don't say that.
Yeah, but the zone is the graveyard, so it is the graveyard zone.
Ugh, I know. It's like some shitty Sonic the Hedgehog ripoff.
Or Yu-Gi-Oh,
Yu-Gi-Oh. I played my trap card.
But anyway, creatures die. I mean, not just creatures. I mean, everything in Magic can potentially be destroyed. But
Everything
I guess
outside of Magic can potentially be destroyed.
And so we are true. Usually with fire. So we're going to talk kind of a little bit. It's a little bit like back to basics. So we're going to go through each colour.
Yeah.
Kind of see how each of them handles bringing things back from the graveyard, and we'll probably criticise vernacular or the way that the way that cards are called in their mechanics, like the what I'm looking for. The mechanic, the keywords.
Yeah, this feels very much Magic the Flavouring circa 2021.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not just... now, the way you pitched it to me the other week is you went, reanimation. Or necromancy and stuff. Because when you actually dig into the flavour of what the fuck we're talking about, and we do start at the very obvious thing about talking about, okay, bring something back from the graveyard, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, X, Y, and Z, whatever. You start seeing that all the colours have, this is one of those things that, because it's so intrinsic to, the kind of language of magic and fantasy, and, I mean, I say that broadly speaking. Obviously, there are people in the real world who do believe this kind of thing. There are real world religions and faiths and whatever, but this is what Magic's been based off of. All the colours have, their own way of doing this, but, or do they? How does, and there's a whole meta-narrative.
Where is the separation of terminology?
You crack the tomb of it open, and you're just like, oh my god, there's so much going on here. So... I mean, should we just dive in?
Yeah, so the two things I put into Scryfall, I did a very basic thing of just putting in return graveyard battlefield, put that into a search, came out with 596 cards. Obviously, that's by Oracle text. There might be some ways that it's not necessarily a creature dying or a creature being brought back, so it's not necessarily exactly 596 cards, but comparatively, the same thing put in return graveyard and hand into Scryfall brings back 681 options.
Jesus.
So, yeah, there is some overlap as well within that, but I mean, the two are kind of fairly close, I think, and also the thing is one side will cover things like Archaeomancer, returning an instant or sorcery to hand, whereas the other one is more covering things like, I don't know, like Zombify, Resurrection. that kind of thing.
I mean, all right, we'll get into it.
And that's where I've put those two things in. Arguably, I put in the battlefield one first because that is more traditionally what I thought we were going to be talking about, which is just when you return a game object piece from the graveyard to the battlefield, specifically usually around creatures, but we'll break down that kind of concept soon. But then when I started seeing some of the overlap, I then put in the hand prompt. And some of the cards that it came up with, the words they use and stuff actually sounds more like Necromancy than some of the things that you see on the battlefield one, even if bringing something back to your hand isn't necessarily bringing it back into a position of being alive, able to attack and block. Does a creature coming back to your hand count the same thing as, recovering a dead body or bringing something back from the dead? And that's something I wouldn't mind picking apart a little bit later down the line. But if we're going to start from the top, we are starting, I think, with one of the colours that... the cat's out of the bag. Some colours do this better than others.
You say that. I think there's definitely colours that do it more iconically. And they're the first two that we're going to look at, right?
Oh, yeah, so we don't need to go by WUBRG, especially considering blue is a very strange one in this conversation.
Oh, yeah, sure. I did actually just forget that blue was the second colour. Good. I have the colour wheel tattooed on my arm.
Yeah, not necessarily a place you'd have like right in front of your face all the time.
Yeah, but it's close enough. So yeah, let's do white, black,
blue, red,
green.
Yeah, cool, perfect. That works because it puts the two outliers together, and then we circle back on one that I'd like. Yeah, green is an interesting one to talk about as well.
Green's the most interesting one.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's start with white.
Sorry, white. You do it the best, but you're also the worst.
So it's interesting that you say they do it the best. I didn't count how many to hand ones there are, but cards that have the words, battlefield, return, and graveyard in them. White has 143 cards, and black has 193.
Right.
Which, all things considered, with how Magic's moved over the years, that's actually quite a lot closer than I expected it to be. Because back in Alpha, you did genuinely have the card Resurrection.
Yeah.
Which is the original 2 white return a creature from the graveyards to play.
Yeah.
And that was in Alpha. That was Wizards going, white brings back things from the dead.
Yeah, it's clerics. It's healing magic.
It's that whole, it's all the religious thing. Yeah, angels, spirits, things like that. Like, it makes a lot of sense for white to be the colour that, brings things back from the graveyard. What was I going to... How did I say it? It was a feeling of bringing something back from the dead as an act of mercy.
Yes.
Which is very different to how black does it, and we'll get to black later. But, when you have cards that are things called, like, Abiding Grace or Against All Odds, this idea of, like, almost miraculous saving, there is literally a card called Miraculous Recovery.
Yeah.
And this is moments of, like, near death, of where something's been rescued from the jaws of death and brought back, which, arguably, when a card goes to the graveyard and comes back, it has died.
Yeah.
You haven't saved it, you have brought it back, but a lot of these cards kind of play with that flavour of when all hope was lost, when it looked like death was the only way, somehow, through this white magic spell, you were managed to, be brought back or got saved at the last moment. Jackdaw Saviour is a perfect example of like a little mouse that was clearly going to get eaten by something, and the bird comes and swoops in and goes, "Gotcha, don't worry, you're not dead." Which potentially is a little bit closer to regenerate, but...
Well, I mean, but okay, so this is when... Obviously, you're starting from a place of, okay, we'll do, like, X, Y, and Z brings X, Y, and Z back from the graveyard. But, like, as we'll see as we go through the colours, and this is something that white starts to move into as when they get away. I think white and black, funnily enough, when we're talking about first, a lot of their flavour and a lot of the way they do things have kind of swapped over the years how and why they do things. Because the further away white comes from straight up bring certain thing back from the graveyard, the more it seems to go down two other divergent routes, which is bring something back from the graveyard if it's like smaller than you, because you are a protectorate. So you have things like like Sun Titan or like I don't know, like Brilliant Restoration. No, that's the artifact.
Ascend from Avernus.
Ascend from Avernus. All those things like if something costs 2 or less, bloody blah. Bring it back
Raise the Past was the most recent one in Magic Foundations. 2 white return all creatures with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Yeah,
which for a white. To go all the way from Alpha, where it's 2 white return anything, it's now 2 white return all of the little things.
Yeah, and I was thinking of Reveille Arc when I was trying to say Resurrection. So that's one way it does it. So it's this kind of like this righteous protector, and then the other way is sacrifice a thing to protect your other thing. Now this is where we start to get a little bit muddy in the waters of like what do we mean by reanimation, resurrection, because you have things which are, like sacrifice, I don't know, like... So you have things like Martyr's Cause, for example, which is 2 and a white for an enchantment that says, sacrifice a creature, prevent all damage to a creature or player from one source, right? Or like loyal retainers, sacrifice loyal retainers, return target legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only during your turn before attack is declared. So it's like these things themselves are putting themselves in the way of harm to bring your thing back from death or from like a near-death experience. So would something like Martyr's... So if loyal retainers is absolutely bringing something back from the graveyard, but it's still the same tone and flavour as, say, like Martyr's Cause, which is preventing the damage that would certainly kill your creature. Well, is that how white does things now? It's
Selfless Saviour. It's a 1-drop 1/1. You sacrifice it to give another creature indestructible, which, for all intents and purposes, saves it from dying. Is that a form of... It's not necessarily a form of resurrection, I guess. But then this is the question again: does a thing have to go to the graveyard and then be brought back for it to be considered resurrected? When certain cards, might not necessarily, I don't know, I'm looking at something, say, for example, like Jailbreak.
Yeah.
Like the creature in that, the flavour of that is that the creature hasn't died, it's just been put in jail. And you're breaking it out and bringing it back to the battlefield, but then that's kind of that's blurring the line between when something leaves the battlefield compared to is it actively, like, dying and it's no longer existing within this mortal realm. And then you've also got a card like, say, Late to Dinner.
Yeah.
Which you return a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield and create a food token. But in the flavour of the cards, the returned creature is in spirit form.
Yeah,
it's not it's not been revived and it's the same thing walking around.
I think it's a certain righteousness, like it's a certain sort of bond of duty. Like Late to Dinner, for example, is like meant to be kind of a comedy card, right? It's very twee as things like this go. But it's the idea that even in death, this creature's got like a job to do, which is go and have dinner with their mate, which is kind of nice. I mean, like you have also. To kind of blur the lines even more, you might have something like Angelic Renewal, which is an enchantment that says if any creatures are put in your graveyard from play, then you may bury Angelic Renewal and put one of those creatures into play.
That is actively using an enchantment to replace the death of a creature, but the creature has to die for it to be able to come back. That going to the graveyard coming back aspect is something that I think maybe more white cards should replicate, because it gives that feeling of it's going to die and it has died, but you're snatching it back. It's like when you give CPR to someone.
Yeah.
Like their heart might have stopped. They might be clinically dead for a certain amount of time, and then you, through an act of mercy, have brought them back to death, back from the death, rather than being something like, say, a random black creature that's been in the graveyard for several turns, is probably rotting by this point, but your necromantic magic, we'll get to it, but that can then bring it back, weeks, days, months later.
Yeah.
Whereas for this, it always feels like you've only been dead a short time, and you're only just about to die, and then you've been, fixed, as it were, or you've managed to...
Well, the fixed thing's interesting.
Because then that's the other side of what does white bring back from the graveyard.
I was going to talk about Valkyrie's Call.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Which is whenever a non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, return that card to the battlefield under its own control with a 1/1 counter on it. It has flying and is an angel. Now, that's not like a common effect, right? But I think it fits so closely with what white wants to do. Mm-hmm. Your creature has died, and it has such a mark of duty and righteousness that it comes back as a literal fucking angel. Like, that is...
Yeah, so, it's almost like the battlefield's been blessed that anything that would die on your side gets, like, converted, gets, Elspethified.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is very, very cool. It feels very white. Like, you've got a similar card recently with Smile at Death. 3 white enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. Return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. This is what Alicia... who Smiles at Death's creature card did. Whenever they attacked, you'd get a creature with power 2 or less from the graveyard back. We might talk about that later when we get to like multicolored kind of cards, but similar thing. It's only a white card. Alicia was a red character, but this is a white effect. That idea of and it's a card Alicia ensured our survival. Now we will forge our future. It's almost like that. I've been inspired by someone who always said no to death. That I will also not die. And to be able to leave behind that kind of an essence, to have other people then be able to just go, hey, because this person was so defiant, I can just imbibe and believe in that, and then it will make me come back again. Like, that shows some devotion.
Gift of Immortality is an interesting one. So the idea of, like, the creature dies, they come back to the battlefield, there's, like, a moment where that creature mechanically can be killed before the enchantment is put back on them. So it's almost like they're not cheating death, but they're the creature in question is so honoured by the gods, by you, like, giving it that thing, and is so useful that this kind of gift of, like, you're doing well? Okay, here's another gift of immortality, and we'll just kind of keep that rolling, and, like, you might fail, but that's kind of cool. Like,
so it's like Hercules can keep doing keep doing feats that might kill him. As long as he has a little bit of time in between each of them, he can keep pushing himself. I mean, you've got a similar kind of idea also in things like Second Sunrise, Faith's Reward, Brought Back. I think it kind of goes in opposite order. Though in terms of like Second Sunrise, this idea that the sun rising, bringing something back from the graveyard, same kind of thing with Sun Titan, same thing with Sigil of the New Dawn. There's this idea of the sun rising, bringing back things from the, it's night turning to day, it's death turning back into life again. And if white mana is a manifestation of the sun, I mean, the literal symbol on this mana symbol is the sun, we might think, grass and plains. It's like, yeah, but it's the sun.
It's the giver of life, yeah.
Right, exactly. And that idea, that giver of life, that giver of re-life, I mean, and yes, Second Sunrise only can bring back anything. It brings back, it's known mostly for, eggs effects of where you make a load of 0-drop artifacts, sack them off and bring them back, but it does also get back enchantments and artifacts. The bright tunnel sometimes leads back to life. That idea that death and life and death in Magic can just be this like flat circular kind of effect of where you just kind of sit on the periphery and kind of slide back in again.
Quite a few planes now have literal afterlives that mean that they're not actually physically lost. Mm-hmm. It's just a different state of existing within the plane.
Yeah, like this other one, Retether, like this idea of bringing of you've lost your tether with the ley lines of the world, and then we're able to bind them back up again. Yeah. Okay. Retether brings back auras from the graveyard to play.
Well, this is something White does very well. It brings back equipment and auras.
Well, this is the thing. In general, artifacts like you've got Argive and Find, which is just a single white to return any artifact or enchantment from your graveyards to your hand. It's not to play; it's to your hand. But the idea of archaeology, digging up the past. And then we just start looking at things like Lorehold, where the things that you're digging up are like the spirits of your ancestors. Like at that point, like surely that's just as much resurrection or revival as it would be to reconstruct the mortal body of somebody. As long as you can keep their spirit, I don't understand how that's in a way not revival. Like the disturb mechanic. All of these things that die, you revive them as spirits.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are certain mechanics that kind of seem to blend across colours, which sort of it's weird when we talk about like the flavour in colours of like how these things do things, because sometimes individual mechanics, it's almost like they cheat them colour-wise, but it's more for the tone of the set. So like Unearth, for example, which is from one of the Innistrads, the only colour that doesn't have Unearth is white. And
is it Black Unearth?
Yeah, I can't...
That's right, not Green Unearth, because originally Unearth was from Grixis, which was the red, blue, black. I did plane of Necromancy.
Unearth into Scryfall, and the only colour that didn't have an Unearth card was white. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's also. I want to touch back on that again when we get to blue, because I think there's a parallel to be spoken about between Unearth and Flashback and what they kind of represent. And then kind of like one last thing I guess we'll talk about with white is that idea of bringing artifacts back. You've got things like patch up, and recommission. The idea that rebuilding something, which is again something we'll touch again when we get into red. But there's a similar idea of having to rebuild something or reform the magic, like. Nowadays in Magic, we have enchantments that are creatures. We have artifacts that are creatures. In fact, artifact creatures have been around for a really long time. And if you're using a white spell to return an artifact from the graveyard to play, and that artifact happens to be a creature, and within Magic, certain creatures tend to actually have almost like borderline, like, souls, kind of like Khan. Is that just the same thing, just with a slightly different form of existence? And that idea of being able to go, cool, we can reform and reconstruct, which happens again in a couple of other colours. The fact white can also do that, it just shows that in overall it has the greatest scope of returning things from the graveyard to the battlefield. The fact it can do it with basically every type of card. There's even I think there's a card called Sacred Ground. Of if a land under your control would be destroyed by a target or ability, you return it. Which, that means that white does every single card type. It does Planeswalkers, there's the big, brilliant Restoration, whatever hell it's called, the big white Commander Masters card that brings back all artifacts, enchantments, and Planeswalkers.
Is it Brilliant Restoration?
Something like the Brilliant Restoration is the one from Kamigawa. Let me see if I can quickly see it somewhere.
I was also...
Triumphant Reckoning.
Alright, I was also going to say, Unearth is in all colours, Undying isn't white. I've just
Undying, right? Sure,
which we'll get to later on.
Yeah. So I mean, the fact that it does it in various different forms and varieties, like the words being what must be done, unfinished business, tune up. Like there are various different forms of returning.
Replenish.
Exactly. The restoration of Ijanjo. Like and the fact that white is kind of. It's almost like, because white is almost like the colour of general society and like human society or like sentient society, it kind of makes sense for this to kind of have this feeling of rebuilding, reconstructing, and always wanting things to be almost like respecting life, You know, whether that is bringing it back or like, you know, revering the spirits of the damned, or, you know, having the do you mind cat?
Scrabbly cat.
Good lord. And they do it as an act of mercy. They do it out of some feeling of righteousness, not out of a feeling of this is the natural way of things, and not because of I need to use this body for my own means. It's all returning a thing to its natural state.
Yeah.
But also kind of saying no to death, which can sometimes feel a little bit like I'm unwilling to accept the natural process of life and death. I am better than you. I'm going to bring this thing back from the graveyard.
Which is the total fucking opposite to Black, which, if White is all about mercy and protecting and saving you from the grasp of death, Black is all about, oh, you've died. Well, I'm going to rip you kicking and screaming back to reality.
I'm going to use the shit out of you. Thank you very much. It's no longer your body. It's now my body.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, what's that? I have to chop off a limb to get you back from the dead. Yeah, I'll fucking do that.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. So as I said for White, there was the colour of mercy. What did I write down for Black? Bringing something back for the dead as a tool. But there is also an aspect of religious quality to, or not necessarily religious, but that the idea of clerics, you know, being...
I mean, Black White is like the ultimate sort of Gothic church vibe, right?
Yeah.
So like Black is going to have that kind of high religious, high Anglican sort of feel about them, you know, high Gothic. And yeah, absolutely, like there seems to be a lot of ritual when it comes to Black, and like there's ritual with White, which is why they're obviously sort of the constantly opposing colours. But with ritual when it comes to Black, it's so on fucking brand for Black, because it's about paying a cost to cheat the natural order of things, right?
It's true, but then also I think it's interesting that White's resurrection seems to be almost an act of desperation of you can't die, I'm not letting you die. Whereas with Black, it's like I command death. I will. It's not I want to bring you back. It's that I have the power to resuscitate or reanimate your corpse rather than saving the life that you are. It's more and saving the soul. That's the thing. I think White's trying to save the soul, and trying to bring the soul of the person back. Whereas Black doesn't give a shit about the soul. It cares about the nuts and bolts and the body that was left behind.
I mean, if you look at like cards like Animate Dead and Necromancy, which are effectively the same thing, where you can enchant a creature, notably a creature in any graveyard.
Yes.
Because I use a lot of this in my Kiku Knight's Flower deck, where it's a Necromancy deck, and that's how I describe it, rather than a Reanimation deck. It's a Necromancy deck, because you can reanimate anything, so you can steal other people's shit out of the graveyard for your own purposes. Reanimate, the classic 1-mana reanimate sorcery, is that put a target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under control, you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. And like with Animate Dead and Necromancy, the cost, I suppose, is the fact that when that creature dies or your enchantment gets taken out, that creature also goes away. So it's like your hold of them and you lose a card mechanically in game. So yeah, all of these things are, I can steal your shit, and there's loads of them. You know, Graveyard Parlay, fucking Grave Betrayal, the enchantment with that when anything dies.
Rise of the Dark Realms.
Yeah.
Everyone's stuff comes back under my control.
Yeah.
That idea of I am master of death. I'm not a master of life, I am a master of death. I think that's a very interesting distinction between the two. I mean, there's a load of cards things similar to Apprentice Necromancer, Doom Necromancer. What's the horror one? Hell's Caretaker.
Yeah.
That all do a sacrifice a thing to bring back a thing. Blood for Bones is a really good example of this. 3 and a black sorcery as an additional cost to cast this spell. Sacrifice a creature. Return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and another creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Black plays a lot more in you've got to give something to get it back.
Yeah.
The fact that it's we kind of glossed it, kind of not move straight past it, but I don't think we highlighted enough that idea of Animate Dead and Necromancy. You are enchanting the corpse, the cadaver, and that's what's bringing it back. A lot of these other spells are you do a ritual and the thing's alive. Cool. There's a lot of creatures that return themselves from the graveyard to the battlefield.
Yeah, reassembling skeletons.
Fair enough. Like cool. That's a whole other kind of way that black mana works. But this is you actively enchanting a cadaver and having that cadaver revivify itself. And then again, when you lose that contact, the enchantment goes with it. It goes back to being dead again. Whereas a lot of these other things, you pay the price. And obviously that's kind of one of Black's big things of nothing comes for free. You know, the reanimate being a good example of the bigger the creature you get out, the more it hurts you to get it out of the graveyard. Black doesn't care about losing its life, but it does come at a cost. It's not just White going, I've put enough mana into this spell, I can bring it back. You know, and a lot of the White spells that do this have a very high coloured mana requirement.
Yeah.
Comparing, say, Resurrection to white as a sorcery, return any creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Zombifies 3 and a black. It only takes 1 black mana to resurrect as much as 2 white mana can.
Yeah.
The ease that black mana does it at typically is a lot more efficient, which is why usually people think of as black as being the reanimation colour. Because if you're playing it competitively, you're playing Reanimate, you're playing Goryo's Vengeance, you're playing the really cheap ones that come at a high cost because you only need it to happen once or twice to kind of cheat the system, get your ridiculous bomb into the graveyard and back out really cheaply. But to have that feeling of it doesn't come for free, that there's got to be a cost, this cycle of life and death actually feels a lot more natural than, say, the white way of doing it. The white way of doing it, of denying death or stealing death back from... or stealing a life back from the jaws of death feels a little bit more like a betrayal of the life system than, say, black is, of where things are naturally dying, and yes, it's unnatural to bring things back again, but it takes a life cost to do so.
There is also a thing with black as well where, like, if white is bringing things back sort of better than before, like we spoke about, like, +1/1 and it becomes an angel, black's doing this thing where they don't care if things come back like slightly worse. And I think that's so much, like, that's so bang on, not only for like the kind of, hey, this is the cost you're paying to bring something back, but also for like the actual flavour of things being like these decayed corpses. Like, you have things like persist as a mechanic is something that's now on like a lot of different creatures, but the card persist is a black sorcery for 2. Return target non-legendary creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. And then they did a really cool thing the last time we were on Innistrad, where obviously zombies are the big thing, but to like kind of really play and push the idea of like zombies as a, flavorful tribe. They made Decayed, which is you bring something back, it can't block, and then when it dies, it gets. Hang on, let me read the flavor text.
You have to sacrifice it at the end of combat once it's attacked.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like this idea of like you're literally just throwing the fucking corpse of whatever this is at your opponent, just being like, I don't care. It's going to obliterate on impact, like a big fleshy like gas bomb. I don't fucking care. Go.
Which makes more sense, right? Arguably, bringing back a dead body that's been dead for a while shouldn't be as efficient as being able to resurrect something that's only just very recently died. There should be a dilapidation, to the goods. And I feel like they're doing a good job of... There are generic spells that I've spoken about, like Zombify, which kind of undermines that a little bit, but they are doing a good job of kind of pushing the limiters of like what black can do and how it does it and how it makes it feel when you're playing. I don't feel like you're never going to get a reanimate again. A 1 mana efficiency brings something back. It's in the same way if you can't reinvent Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah.
You've created the most efficient version of that spell, and you've done it with reanimate as well. So now the way to balance that out, if you want cheaper cost, is it to come with a little bit more of a downside, or to seem a little bit more realistic, like persist is. A -1/-1 counter doesn't seem like a lot, but it is enough of a drawback to make you not, be able to abuse something that's like got 1 toughness or things like that. It kind of feels more within what black should be able to do, which is, yes, bring things back from the dead, but it's not bringing them back perfect.
Where does something like Living Death fall into this then?
So Living Death, I actually wrote down, is the exchange of life and death.
Oh, he's fucking prepared. He's got it.
So because you've got things like Blood for Bones, of where you need to sacrifice something to bring something back, the way I look at Living Death is that it took all of the power of everything that was alive. And you can skew things in a game of Magic of where, oh, I've happened to mill 70 cards of my library. Oh, I've got no creatures in play, or I cast Living Death, hold priority, sacrifice my board.
Yeah.
That's kind of like uber black. Like that's the necromancer who's been doing this for a really long time. He's like, you don't even know what you're doing, you silly man. When he's fighting against someone else. Like, but now an average thing of Living Death for me is that it's taking all of the life. And it's taking all of that because you have to sacrifice all the creatures. Well, you exile the graveyards first, then you sacrifice the creatures, and then you bring them back. But it's almost like I feel like you need the exchange of life-death to happen for that to kind of really work. I know the idea is it's just an exchange of one for the other, but I don't understand how the magic of being able to destroy everything that's already alive and then bring everything back from the dead works without it being an accurate exchange of life force.
Yeah.
But at that point, my question is why it doesn't have green involved.
Well, so, I mean, I really only looked at, like, the monocolours, but I suppose we'll talk a little bit about, like, the multicolours now, because when I did look at sort of wider things and sort of different colour combinations and stuff, I think there isn't... When we talk about green, I think we'll start to see it a lot more. You really can't have multicoloured Resurrection Necromancy spells without black involved.
Yeah.
Like, I think the ultimate is green-black. And we'll talk about it when we get to green maybe a bit more. But like this idea of like understanding that death is a part of life. Like, life only exists because there is death, right? Death is nothingness, but the absence of death is life. So to understand, to master the death aspect of it means you have control over life.
Well, this is why Liliana being more involved with the Witherbloom makes sense, right?
100%.
And it's why I think when you start getting into the 2 color combinations, because I did look at all of them, and it's funny, right? Simic has exactly 1 card that has the 3 words graveyard, return, battlefield in. Gruul has exactly 1 card that has those 3 words, and neither of those,
because they're all about life. They're all about like throwing yourself into the madness and chaos.
Well, one's
of life.
more about evolution, and then one's more about living life to your fullest, you know, and most aggressive, and living as long as you can live, kind of thing, which is very against, you know, resurrection and necromancy. I guess, technically speaking, living past death is a very kind of fuck you, but that feels more a little bit more Rakdos than it does Gruul.
Yeah, I mean, the Gruul is about, you know, riding it so hard the fucking wheels come off, like, whereas Rakdos is nihilistically throwing yourself into the moment because who cares if you live or die,
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And if you do die, fuck it, you can probably just come back again.
And as much as there are more Orzhov cards than there are Golgari cards that have those 3 words in them, I can't remember exactly how many, I didn't write it down, but 36, yeah. 36 Orzhov had. I think Golgari only had about 16.
Yeah, but I think the main difference there is, just after doing a cursory look at all the different kinds of cards, when you have Orzhov, you obviously have the Orzhov as a guild in Magic, right? Which are obviously all to do with like life and death. They're the evil Catholic Church, and they have a lot of things like, you know, when this creature dies, create a spirit token. What was that mechanic?
Afterlife.
Afterlife. Thank you. So obviously that was in Guilds of Ravnica, and they have a lot of that different kind of stuff. But the Golgari, I mean, again, talking about Ravnica or whatever, but you'll have cards like Grisly Salvage, which is, you know, you mill stuff into the graveyard and then you'll bring something back. The Golgari are all about like finding objects or like making resource through the death and life cycle.
Yeah.
And being a part of that like cultivating process, which is very green.
Dredging sounds like it's a boogie word in the game of Magic, but dredging, that idea of reusing, recycling, whereas Orzhov doesn't necessarily, as a guild, care so much about bringing back things from the dead, even if there are a lot of Orzhov cards, well, not a lot of, but there's a lot of overlap between white and black of bringing things back from the dead. So of course, black-white cards will epitomise that in some fashion or another.
Well, also it's that thing of like that indentured servitude, which I think is a card. Maybe it's a card very similar to that, where the Orzhov are like, it's almost like if white bringing stuff back from death is because it's a noble cause of like, I give you this gift of life. The Orzhov are going, we have the power to bring you back from death because we want you to. We are so when you were saying like black is mastering the art of death, what the Orzhov are doing is they're they're maliciously mastering the art of life to the point where they bring you back from the dead to serve them further. Like, it's a total bastardization of like white's prospects, which is exactly what black would do.
Well, I think even their mechanics, you know, Afterlife and Haunt, they're not bringing things back from the dead as much as continuing to use you once you have died.
In your afterlife.
Yeah, you're not getting to relive. You're just getting to live. You're not getting to live again. You live on.
Your life
and you're
is
living
continuing,
on. Yeah, and you are living on under the under their thumb. Whereas the Golgari is about like that thing. You as a human, me as a person. You know, Nathan can go, but the things that make me Nathan, all my parts and bits and pieces, that can go into something else. So you're going to lose the Nathan, but you're going to keep the energy and all of that, and that will pre-process in, as opposed to Nathan's going to still be there. Nothing of his mortal life or mortal body is there, but Nathan as a thing will linger on. Is quite a different kind of feeling of how to keep life going on after death.
Which, and also, I suppose both those colour pairs also share a lot of cards that have a sacrifice a creature, gain a life, right? So that was Witherbloom's whole thing. That's like Dino, right? And then you also have cards like, I forget. What's the Phyrexianized elf from Dominaria? Is it an elf? No, it's a core. 2 mana. LSL core.
LSL core, yeah.
Yeah, so sacrifice a thing, gain a life, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the benefiting from things dying rather than using the things that are dead for a benefit. Which sounds like a really small difference, but I think one's way more manipulative than the other. And I think once we get to green, we'll start to look at why that's true more, and why the Golgari are never considered to be particularly evil, and I would actually consider to be more of a death guild than Orzhov. The Orzhov
Oh, yeah, no,
even if the Orzhov actually play around with that idea of life, death a little bit more.
The Orzhov are obsessed with living. That's why they extend their afterlife and use their afterlife in a manner like Karlov and the rest of the Ghost Council still like dress in finery and keep all their like wealth with them. They're obsessed with life, even though that they are like they are basically a death church. Whereas the Golgari, they're not like hurtling towards death as like a goal, but they accept death as a cycle and perpetuance of like what's going on like around them, and that's something that green also does by itself.
Yeah,
which is a really interesting sort of idea.
Yeah, one's just accepting the process, as one's almost denying the process.
Yeah,
and that's what I said earlier about how sometimes white feels like it's denying the natural process to be able to go, hey, raise the past, and the past sometimes is supposed to stay dead, you know. And there is a very thin line between all of the people that died in the war are able to be saved last minute and be brought back, and it's almost like, you know, this miracle. And then there's another one saying, you know, I refuse to let all of these people die. Let's bring them back from the dead, and maybe they come back slightly more hollow. You know, they still had to live through the experience of dying. Is that something that maybe is that something they even wanted? And we need to kind of also separate this idea that black isn't evil. You know, white isn't good. The things that black and white magic are doing aren't necessarily good versus evil.
No, but black is selfish, and so you're using, as you said at the very top of us talking about black, they're using this necromancy as a tool to further their own gains. Whereas white is supposedly selfless or interested in the bigger idea of like a society and a group. So they're saving people for the betterment of everyone else around them.
Sure. You could argue, maybe argue that enchantment that you said about the when everything comes back as an angel. What if I want a choice? You know.
Well, yeah.
There's one really good card called Yojimbo who bars the way. Oh, I had it right there already. Click. Yojimbo who bars the way. Whenever a legendary permanent other than Yojimbo who bars the way is put into a graveyard from play, return that card to its owner's hand. Flavor text. As I died, I rejoiced. I would see my family again. But then I woke up, back in the battlefield, back in Kamigawa, back in hell.
Nice.
And that idea that maybe white isn't so fucking transcendent that it can go, cool, I'm going to give you the option, the choice of coming back or not. Like, that's why I feel like Golgari feels kinder. Whereas when you combine white and black together for resurrection, it no longer feels righteous. Whereas somehow the black and green doesn't necessarily feel more righteous, but it doesn't feel selfish. The black side of things is more that, yes, necromancy and the idea of death and bringing things back from the dead is more of a black ley line kind of expression. Obviously, white ley lines can also be used to bring things back from the dead, but the black one is more of a natural one. And then when you combine that with green, that is the process rather than the decision.
Should we talk about blue?
Yeah. So there's...
Blue's a really weird one.
Yeah, so there are zombies.
Yes, there are zombies.
But it's science zombies.
So I put this out on Bluesky, some of you might have seen it, where I gave a kind of like little tease that we were doing this episode. And I was like, I put on Headless Scarb, right, was the example I used on Bluesky. And Headless Scarb is a zombie creature, obviously. It's 2 and a blue for a 3/6. This was one of the first cards that really made me fall in love with magic, by the way. As an additional cost to cast Headless Scarb, exile a creature card from your graveyard. Headless Scarb enters the battlefield tapped. And all the Scarbs, which are the blue zombie sort of like faction on
the Stitchers.
Yeah, so Geralf or Geralf is the Stitcher. So rather than being risen from the dead from like a grave, they're the Frankensteins.
Yeah, they're pieced together through science.
So by sacrificing,
and then later or discarding cards from your hand,
discarding cards from like the graveyard or your hand or whatever, you're creating something that's bigger than the sum of those parts.
Yeah.
Now, is it cheating death, or is that science? Is that just science?
See, that's for me, yeah. See, that's like, because I guess the question might then be, am I still Nathan? You know?
Yeah.
And I think there have been some
story. Theseus.
And it's kind of, yeah, basically, and it kind of works that there has been mentions, because there have been a fair few stories about Ludovic and also Geralf over the years of where I think we've probably touched on this somewhere within a story, and I've kind of forgotten that little nugget of lore. Of Crown, for example, is an intelligent creature.
Yeah.
Intelligence being, you know, a scale of 1 to 10, whatever. But it's sentient and it knows what it makes decisions and things like that. Now, is Crown still the thought process of whatever head it was to begin with, or did it just get imbibed with impetus? And it happens to have all of the cognitive, you know, ability because it's a preserved human brain, but it's no longer Jack from down the road. It's now Crown, and it just follows the directive of Geralf. And at
Yeah,
that point, I don't know. I don't think that new creature has been revived. You've created new life from X life.
But isn't that so? That's a really good question. I don't necessarily have an answer. I kind of feel like if you're being sort of slightly charitable to the fact that we're fucking talking about a fantasy card game that involves magic, I think you have to kind of go, yes, this is Blue's version of Necromancy.
Yeah.
But it is really fucking wild to think that a whole colour of magic, arguably the colour of magic within the context of the game with like wizards and shit, is the one that can't really do the life-death thing.
But I guess it makes sense, because if they're of the mind, right, and it's hard to touch the mind, it's like you can't be a telepath and then read the mind of a zombie, right? Because it's not processing thoughts.
Fuck. That's a fucking existential. You can't read the mind of a zombie.
Yeah, no, because maybe, I mean, when a creature comes back as a legendary creature and it's a zombie, does it, like Mikaeus, when Mikaeus came back and you tried to say mind scan him, would you still have lingering thoughts of him as a human?
Well,
when he was alive, would you still have the feelings and impetus of him now as a zombie?
This is a fucking road you go down, because you look at the Amonkhet zombies,
and they're usually blue, and they're blue and white. Well, you've also got a lot of the
fucking three colours. They're Esper colours.
Yeah, they're all three.
Yeah, fucking.
And I feel like they're actually more blue, because there's more blue-white kind of in them, I think, than black necessarily, because the black ones usually like the ones that are off from the away from the society, the ones that are wandering, like Dread Wanderer, I believe, is one of the black ones.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting Scryfall search. If you were to type in Eternalizer and Balm, how many white and blue cards are there versus black ones? Probably more. Right?
I think probably more, because the idea was that it was the intelligence and the society creating those zombies, wrapping them nicely, not just going, hey, there's some thing that grew back out of its grave, and it's rotting. It's like, no, we've preserved it. I mean, in human life, when we mummify bodies, we use formaldehyde, we replace the blood with a whole chemical that preserves the body. We wrap them so they don't, I mean, obviously back in the day they wrapped them because it was much more sanitary, but to almost preserve that human aspect of them.
How do you know so much about... You say this like we're doing this now. Who's doing this now?
We still embalm bodies to this day. Repatriations and things like that.
Am I being super fucking...
No. My mum's a funeral director, so I have like a really good insight to this.
How did I fucking not know your mum's a funeral director?
You don't know I was a funeral director? How did you not know that? She's an undertaker.
What?
Yeah, like graduated, like
so much about you.
Well studied, like genuine, has a degree in funeral directing.
She's a pagan.
Yeah, I know. So she's both sides. She's a cleric and a stitcher.
She puts them in the ground, and then later that night is just like starts doing her rituals. It's like,
we're not spreading this rumour, no. But the way I look at it, right, is that
she's a grave robber.
The Amonkhet, well, this is the thing, right? Is it kind of depends on what your intention is, because the Amonkhetes did it through their intelligence of how to preserve a body, and then also that need of reintroducing them back to society. So of course that's white-blue. It's the same thing with the Innistrad, the Scarbs. They didn't resurrect them through magic. They used electricity and chemicals and surgery to recreate life. They're not bringing something back from the dead. They are managing to create a facsimile of life, which is what makes it blue. You're not reinstating life within them like white is. You're not using black magic to reanimate them. You are using blue science. There is actually no magic going into making this scarb. It is all your intelligence.
Yeah, okay.
If anything, they should probably be more... They should be a zombie construct rather than being just a zombie.
I fully agree with you, 100%. But just to play devil's advocate on it, because you seem like you're in the flow and you have the answers like you do. On Innistrad specifically, because the Scarbs are specific to Innistrad, there are other blue zombies, Fate Stitcher being one, that has Unearth, which is where I got that fucking wrong Unearth fact from. So the idea of a blue zombie isn't like just on Innistrad, but they are maybe the archetype that we're talking about now. Geralf doing science to that degree, isn't there that quote that you usually find on like mugs? It's like the boy version of Live, Laugh, Love, where it's like science that is you can't explain is like a kid's
indiscernible from magic, yeah.
So,
and there is a line here.
So discuss.
Because the line here, right, is that I feel like an Amonkhet, they don't have the science per se to be able to do something like this. They're not operating with electricity. Is usually where I'm going to draw the line from being rudimentary to being like industrial enough that you can start doing more like modern world things. And Amonkhet very much sits in it's an ancient civilization, so it doesn't have any of the newer things, but it still is doing it with the intention of... Embalming is probably one of the most scientifically profound things that a civilization was able to do for the time.
Well, the Egyptians had dildos.
The Egyptians were incredibly clever. Just to balance what you just said with something a little bit more sensible. But... yeah, like that. They built the pyramids. They have irrigation.
Funny about dildos, mate.
They have irrigation. Like even as you say, like something like a sex toy shows that you are at a point of civilization where you can just start going, what can we build? Not what do we need to build to survive.
Yeah, but should you?
Yeah, hey, look. I mean, they did very well. You know,
they did do well. Hey, there's one thing about the ancient Egyptians. Didn't they do well?
They did great. They did a bang up job.
All right, look, we could talk about scarves all day. In fact, I would love to. But however, we need to talk about a couple of other things with blue.
Yes.
Obviously, you have things like our Chaomancer and our Argivian Restoration.
Yeah.
The Argivians are getting a good word in today. So blue does bring back the idea of technology with artifacts like white does, but also spells. Red also does this. Red and blue are very similar, I think, in a lot of what they're doing here. So the idea of bringing back knowledge,
But that is the idea. Rebuilding something takes knowledge. It's funny that you mentioned Argivian Restoration because it's the only one of its type really within blue, and it's mostly because it's quite an old card. And over the years, you can argue that every colour other than green, and even then, I'm sure there's some plane that you can make it work. Like for example, if we ever visited the insect plane and their vehicles are artifacts that are also of green matter and also a creature, bringing one of those back from the graveyard would make sense in the flavour and the context of that. But red and blue being able to rebuild things that are broken, white also similarly being able to uncover and dig up something that has been buried and lost. And then also, whereas black doesn't return artifacts, black tends not to interact with artifacts in general because it's more of it's a life force colour.
Yeah, it's interesting. They do have the space to make these things work though, because I mean, in black they could obviously do like kind of cursed artifacts. I am desperate because I love me a commander deck that sort of does slightly divergent colour pie things. That's not my. It's not a particularly niche because I think a lot of people like playing that way because we're a bunch of fucking tryhards. But I also do like that. I am desperate for a green artifact masters commander that's like really quite good.
Yeah, Glisser just isn't it, and even the newer Glisser is obviously using black, and at that point, anything you can do in black is potentially better.
Because I thought they were going to do it with. Oh my god, I've forgotten her name. The old lady character from
Avia.
Yes, Avia. Yeah.
Instead, she's just an elf. She's an elfish piper now, isn't she? Just puts a creature or a vehicle. From your hand
it's sort of like I don't want vehicle matters. I want like
she's just generic good green card.
Yeah,
and rather than being specific to artifacts. Yeah, and I just think it's interesting that Argivian Restoration feels very blue, but also now if you don't make that card in blue anymore, you make it in white, you make it in red, true. Because you kind of need to separate what that colour can specifically do, because at this point it does do creatures and it does do artifacts based on Scarbs and Argivian Restoration, but it is way better known for, as you say, resurrecting spell magic, not creature magic.
Which I suppose if we're being like really sort of nitpicky to the theme and flavour, again is like Blue's version of this, but is also not really. That's not Necromancy.
No, and the thing is, so we have to then separate a discard pile from a graveyard if we're talking flavourfully, right? The graveyards. Which, again, they might in some... There's a world in the future where the graveyard is no longer called the graveyard in Magic, and it's called the discard zone, because there is too many different things that don't make sense to... But it doesn't feel like it's going to the graveyard when you cycle something. You know, if you cycle an enchantment, how can it be in the graveyard? You can't go and dig that up. And obviously I know it's metaphorical, but it does make sense. Like, once a spell is cast and that spell is dissipated, it goes automatically to the graveyard. It shouldn't be able to be really easily recovered. You know, like returning an enchantment has almost like this kind of thing of once the magic is dispelled, does it linger there and then you focus your mind and you can reform that magic back together again?
Yeah, that's kind of a nice idea.
But then it's safe. I thought Archaeomancer doesn't fit necessarily Resurrection because you're returning the spell back to your mind to be able to recast it at a later date. It's almost like someone dropped a scroll and you're picking the scroll back up again.
Is that, yeah, I mean, also you look at something like Snapcaster Mage where it gives something flashback. It's almost like they're kind of, again, through the use of science, through the power of science, they're kind of, you know, making a facsimile of a spell that kind of breaks on impact.
First, Snapcaster was going to be my next mention. Yeah, so Snapcaster bounces in. It doesn't return something from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah.
It's unlike, you know, like some quote-unquote reanimation spells of where it's returning...
like some quote-unquote reanimation spells.
You know, like...
a tabloid.
Well, because there are a lot of black spells that say something simple like return this 2 creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it sounds like a necromantic resurrection spell, but it's not, because it's returning it to the hand, even though the wording that it uses sounds way more like bringing something back from the dead compared to some of the black spells that do it directly to the graveyard. Now, Archaeomancer is regaining knowledge back to your mind, whereas Snapcaster, I feel like, comes in, uses a weird suction cannon thing that's on his arm from the original, goes taking the residue of the spell that was just cast, reform it, and then fire it back out again, which is very much that I am making a new version of that spell.
Yeah.
Now, the unfortunate thing is that instants and sorcery... I mean, so if an instant or sorcery makes a creature token, and Snapcaster Mage flashes back a spell that makes a creature token, are you resurrecting that creature token with Snapcaster Mage?
No, because it's a new version of that. It's like, a mouse is a mouse.
And at this point, we're saying that the creatures that we're summoning through the spells aren't, I summoned it from the ether through a creature summon spell. It's I'm actually summoning the creature, and the creature has died, and the creature is the thing I'm bringing back.
You're getting into very old magic metaphysical lore, but I think unless it's those rare examples of a legendary creature token, you're not resurrecting the same fucking soldier.
So I feel like that's where the line has to be drawn. Like Hakim Loreweaver, he is literally weaving the lore of an enchantment. So it's almost like he's seen an enchantment that's already been in play. It's now in the graveyard, and he's able to reweave that magic back in again.
Yeah.
So at that point, I don't think you're resurrecting living matter. You're more playing around with magic.
2 more cards on blue that I want to just kind of pick your brain about. Polymorph.
Interesting.
Because if we're talking about, with black, we were all up for sacrificing creatures to get them back from the graveyard. What is this blue? I mean, red also does it, because transmogrify is literally the blue polymorph. So let's talk about the both of them for now. That's not really resurrection, but what it is trading one matter for another.
It is trading one matter for another, but it's trade where that matter is coming from, I think, is the distinction. Because that matter is coming almost from a random access of your mind. Because I feel like every time you cast Polymorph, you sacrifice a thing in front of you to turn it into whatever creature you currently can next think of. Because it flips from the top of your library until you hit a creature card, right? And that would be, in my mind, how it's represented if we were taking, magic and making it into a Yu-Gi-Oh show. The Polymorph would be, I kill this creature in front of me, and the next thing I can think of is a thing that it turns into. Like Rapid Hybridization and Pongify, as much as they are destruction spells,
they're turning into something new.
If anything, it should be more like Turn to Elk, of where it's an enchantment that gets put on it that transforms it when the enchantment goes. Yes, the creature should then still go to the graveyard. It shouldn't stay in play, but it shouldn't. It's almost like the creature should still be there.
It's a new creature.
Yeah, but the creature should still be there.
But I suppose the flavour of Polymorph, as opposed to just the mechanics of flipping it into a new creature, is you're literally transforming the matter of that thing into something else.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, last card, and then we can move on. Dreams of the Dead. Do you know this card? Top of your head. Don't look.
No, go on. Oh wait, it's right. I haven't read it though. Yeah. It looks like Brave. It looks like a Brave Digger was a card.
3 and a blue, enchantment from Ice Age. Oh, fucking Ice Age!
Good old Ice Age.
What?
Where colour pie did not matter.
Oh, where anything didn't
Nothing
matter.
mattered.
Anything didn't matter. Oh, you want some of the most grim, dark, you've died in the fucking snow, you bitch, card.
But here's also a snowman.
Here's fucking Goblin Snowman. Here comes Goblin Snowman.
Yeah, right.
Fucking here comes Phil Folklore.
Gotta keep it light.
Heather Hudson artwork, which is fucking banging. The enchantment has an ability. The ability is pay 1 and a blue. Take target white or black creature from your graveyard. So we say colour doesn't matter in Ice Age. Colour is completely matters. They just don't give a shit.
Yeah. They care about colour, but not in the ways that we would like them to.
Yeah, the game doesn't care about the colour in terms of a form and function.
No. They do just mention colours.
Yeah.
What do we want with them, mate?
I care about colour. You wrote a colour. Take target white or black creature from your graveyard and put it directly into play as though it were just summoned. So direct reanimation. That creature now requires an additional cumulative upkeep of 2. Right. If the creature leaves play, remove it from the game.
I'd say if you didn't have that last little bit at the end there, that's one of the strongest reanimation spells ever. You know?
Yeah.
So the fact that it specifies a white or black creature, meaning that you cannot bring things back from the graveyards. And I guess the idea is it's dreams of the dead, right? It says you thinking... It's an illusion. And this idea of cumulative upkeep plays into that of where you can't keep it alive unless you keep putting a mana in because you haven't brought it back from the dead. You've brought a dream of it back from the dead. And you can still only bring back creatures that are of the colours that naturally would be bringing things back from the dead.
Yeah.
Which I think is their convoluted way of going, okay, you can't do, like, white and black are the colours of death and coming back from the dead. So blue is going to copy that effect. It's going to do it inefficiently because it has a cumulative upkeep cost to do so, and it can only do it within creatures that are known for coming back.
It's such a fucking blue thing, isn't it, to be like, I can do necromancy if I think about it really hard.
Yeah, it's like green, but it has to try a little harder.
Yeah. I just thought that was a very interesting card.
Yeah, they're very much so. And other than that, blue doesn't, thankfully, crime doesn't really overlap too much with it, which I think is one of the nice things. There needs to be certain things that don't sit within other aspects of the colour pie, because it doesn't make sense for thinky mind to be able to go, cool, how do I resurrect something from the dead without going through all of the hoops that, Dreams of the Dead does to justify itself.
Red
doesn't really do a lot. Well, there's two ways. There are two ways that red likes to do it.
So we're not saying transmogrify. We've already spoken about. There are. I have 3 ways. How many ways do you have?
So what's your non-artifact, non-phoenix way?
Oh, you called my bluff, sir. two of my ways are the same way, but they're not.
Okay, cool.
So my 3. Shall I give you my 3 ways?
Yeah, go ahead.
Phoenix is one of them.
Yeah, right.
How many phoenixes in Magic? Go.
14.
36. 36.
Because
there are. I don't know why that's so fucking wild to me.
And they all come back from the dead in various different ways.
So the example that I have right in front of me, which was the most beautiful one I could find, because the Jason Rainville artwork is behanging, is Rekindling Phoenix from Rise of Ixalan.
This is the one that makes the eggs, right?
Flying. When Rekindling Phoenix dies, create a 0/1 red elemental creature token with, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature, return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn. Phoenix dies, makes a chick dies, Phoenix comes back. Yeah. And they all do something along the lines, right? So they have a creature type with enough of them that you can make a commander deck out of it, by the way, and there's also a red-white...
Red-black. There's a red-black legendary. Oh, there's a Thaurine.
Which is the red-white one.
Red-white one, but it doesn't really play in with...
Fair enough.
But there's a red-black one.
You could do a red-black Phoenix deck.
Yeah.
Just saying. So Phoenixes. So on form and flavour that I'm actually surprised.
The most thing that comes back from the dead creature type probably in all of Magic, outside of zombie.
But zombies are like...
Zombies are cause of the thing.
Zombies are so unintentional in doing that, because that is what they are.
Well, you can't be a zombie unless you're back from the
exactly.
dead. A phoenix is a phoenix before it's died and after
it has
that
ability.
Yeah.
The fact that, I mean, I blame us as well, but I think the fact that Vorthoses in general don't fucking lose their shit every time they print a Phoenix card, because this is actually a little bit criminal.
That's because because it's such a niche, and because creatures used to be so bad, that we've kind of just got used to, well, here's the terrible Phoenix for the set.
But while you say that, Phoenixes, I remember, sort of like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, every set that had a Phoenix, that Phoenix was an archetype for a red deck.
Usually because it plays into a different thing. Like, Arc-like Phoenix really likes instants and sorcery, so it's less about the fact it comes back from the dead, and more the fact it has like a, once you've cast 3 instants and sorceries, here's an effect kind of thing.
Alright. Well, Phoenix is one of them. I kind of feel like, despite them being the most flavourful thing on the planet, that is the flavour. So we've done it.
Yeah.
Congrats to us.
But the fact it's interesting that red doesn't play Phoenix Fire into like an enchantment, you know, of where if a creature would like imagine Gift of Immortality but recolored to red, reflavored to be like Phoenix Fire, and then you can put that on any creature. Yeah.
The second way, so we've done Phenai. Phenai? Phoenixes?
Yes.
Phenai,
sure.
Sounds fun.
Great.
I'm gonna say it. You have the Goblin Engineer family and all they represent.
I like how you went for Goblin Engineer and not Goblin Welder, who's
Goblin
arguably
Welder,
more...
Goblin Engineer, and...
Scrap Welder.
Hey, you got it.
Oh, yeah.
I personally can't have one of them in a deck without having the other 2.
I usually don't have an extra copy of Goblin Welder kicking around, so I can do the other 2, which are also both getting quite expensive these days.
Yeah.
And this all plays into the card 2 and a red, Trash for Treasure. Sack an artifact, bring back an artifact.
Yeah. Trash for Treasure is literally the other example I have of this. So okay, if we're saying that blue gets away with having science and I found this scrap of paper with a spell on it, that's necromancy for what they do. I think we can give red artifacts, because at least artifacts can be creatures as well.
Yeah, so the way I argue this is Feldon. Feldon doesn't return creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield, but for, I think, 2 red, tap, any artifact or creature in your graveyard, you make an artifact token copy of it that you then sacrifice at the end of the turn.
Sacrifice. So that was my third way Felden of the Third Path, you might say. Because I did make that distinct from the Goblin Engineers of the world, if only because it's, I think, flavorfully, honestly, the story of Felden is, all the characters have a ton of story, but this specific card is referring to the idea that his wife has died, so he's trying to bring her back in whatever way he can, using the blend of technology and magic that Dominaria is always trying to fucking balance out.
That's the third way, because the two brothers had their own individual... So Urza is way 1, Mishra is way 2, and then Felden and the other people that didn't want to fight between Krug and Mishra's forces went, there's a third way.
Yeah.
And that is, this is that.
The tragedy is he can't quite get there.
No.
So he's sad Santa. Way, mate. I really hope the first bit of that was a real, knee-jerk...
That was... Yeah.
So he brings back facsimiles of his wife to throw into battle, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the fact that it always disintegrates, you can't maintain it.
Sad.
So it does have a couple of other temporary resurrection kind of things. I think the idea of sacrificing an artifact to bring one back from the graveyard is less that, you're bringing back the thing from the graveyard, and more your same with Pongify or Polymorph, is you're changing matter from a thing that is into something that isn't there, but because you've already experienced it, it's already in your graveyard, it's already in your knowledge pool of things like, I had a really nice toy and it broke one day. I'm going to recreate it from the parts of this other thing that isn't already broken.
Are there? I was really surprised. I think I imagined a mechanic in my head because I thought it seemed like something Red would do, and there has to be cards that do it. Are there no cards in Red or otherwise that have a cast this from the graveyard, it gains haste, exile it at the end of turn? By that I mean creatures that come in and attack.
Yeah, so you've got what's his face, Chainer, the red-black Chainer, allows you to whenever you discard a card.
Yeah, you discard a card.
Whenever, so you can basically allow one thing to be cast from your graveyard per turn.
Yeah, because that was is it still in my Crawl Claw deck? I might have taken it out.
Because you'll see the triple black version of him. You pay 3 and you make a shadow copy of a creature in a graveyard, and then a nightmare version.
All nightmares get +1/+1.
Yeah, and then whenever when he leaves battlefield, all of the other nightmares go away, and that's him actually. That's a bit blue. He's going, I see this thing in my graveyard, and I'm making a summoned illusion version of it. So he did that also with the red-black version. In general, Rakdos has a few different erratic ways of going, hey, I bring something back from the graveyard temporarily. Unearth is the epitome of this.
Yeah.
Literally pay a cost, return this creature from your graveyard to play, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step.
Unearth.
Yes.
Because the ability is in every colour, as we previously
Yes, but the ability specifically does this, where it's a temporary resurrection. And as much as it might be in all colours, because over the years they've managed to justify it, it was focused within blue, red, black, and the Grixis wedge of Alara, and it is much more of a black and red. I think there was only a periphery of blue ones in comparison. But red does it also in... wasn't enough clicks. One more click.
That was a hell of a sound.
Yeah,
Why
sorry.
did you make that?
Because I did. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Cameo of Industry brings back an artifact card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. That's almost like the perfect trifecta between white and red, of where it's bringing back something temporarily of a low mana cost, and you have to sacrifice it at the end of turn. Push the Limit, recently from Ether Drift, 5 red, sorcery, return all mount and vehicle cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, and they'll gain, all of the vehicles become creatures until end of turn. This idea of bringing everything... this is where the flavour kind of falls down, because pushing something to the limit, and the flavour being that right at the end, everything's being... it's when you put the NOS charge in the final act of your Fast and Furious franchise last race kind of thing, and that kind of works. But the idea of you're bringing them all back from the graveyard, what is the magic? It's one last fix to push them over the finish line, maybe, kind of. But you've also got Storm Herald, 2 and a red, a haste human shaman, 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, return any number of aura cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, attached to creatures you control. Something that red doesn't otherwise do, bringing back auras from the graveyard. But I like this idea of a moment of inspiration. Storm Herald, the idea that this thunderstorm comes down and resurrects all of the aura magic that's in the area. It's kind of cool. And then you've also got Thunderkin Awakener, 1 and a red, haste 1/2. Whenever it attacks, choose an elemental creature card in your graveyard with toughness less than Thunderkin Awakener's toughness. It returns to the battlefield attacking, and you sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. It does temporary facsimile resurrection like Felden does, but that's kind of it. And I think from a creature side of things, yeah, it can bring back instants and sorceries a fair whack. You've also got Past in Flames.
Yeah.
A card that gives all of your instants and sorceries flashback, and it itself has flashback. That idea of magic resurrecting itself and coming back again. The fact that blue and red do this a lot more, flashback being the spell version of Unearth, does mean something, but obviously if we're talking about matter, rather than, even artifacts being resurrected, over enchantments being resurrected, actually bringing something back that's tangibly and physically died and then resurrecting, I don't think you can kind of say the same thing of magic, because it's energy, right? Energy never is destroyed, it's only ever dissipated, and it feels like red and blue are kind of taking that energy that's still around and being able to kind of recoalesce it into something that's able to be used again, which is different from doing that with living matter, which is what white does a little bit, but black and green specifically seem to do a lot more, which is why I think moving into green, this idea of returning a permanent from your graveyard to your hand, is that idea.
Green was absolutely the one where I was like, so they have this whole, obviously life is a part of death thing, and, the natural order of things, and, survival of the fittest, and brute force being genuine powers, but also that not necessarily being a bad thing. It's more about we as a collective living ecosystem are getting stronger because we're allowing the strongest to become. And then for some reason there's actually lots of different little mechanics that I think you could argue a little bit like white. Actually, there's a lot of mechanics that kind of play with this idea of okay, what does it mean for something to die, or maybe have a near miss, whatever, all this kind of stuff. But there are cards, as you say, like Eternal Witness, or Balaged Recovery, which is just straight up get a permanent from your graveyard back to.
Dial it back. You have Regrowth. Return any card from your graveyard to your hand. The card is literally called Regrowth. And that means it can also get instants and sorceries, which muddies the waters a little bit. But the fact that it can bring you back anything that has died, because this is back when the graveyard was a place that things go to, whereas now it just feels like the place where once you've used them, or you want to keep them for later, or if you want a second hand that's harder to interact with, back then the graveyard felt more like, okay, when things have died, this is where they go to the graveyard, and Regrowth was that idea that green can allow things to grow back again. That things can come back from the dead. Or maybe even not come back from the dead, but the idea that when things die and mulch down, something else will grow from them, the phoenix effect, is very much part of green's natural state of life and death. Everything works in a rotation. There is literally a card called Life Death.
Yeah.
And it is a green-black card. Green being life side, death being the black side. And that's its most basic form. Magic expressing life as a card is a green card, and expressing death as a card is a black card. Now that to me shows that those two things are combined. Those two things are two sides of the same coin, and the fact that green sits on that axis means it has to have access to allowing things to come back from the dead, or having things dying act within some process. You said survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, survival of the fittest is a discard tutor effect.
Oh, so I meant the literal.
No, I know, but it's because this was in my thing. Because Food Chain is also a similar thing, but instead of sacrificing a creature to get a bunch of mana, you exile it, mostly to stop completely busted, broken combos from happening. But the reality of the card is one thing is eating the other thing, and it's the same thing with Survival of the Fittest, is that the lesser thing, the thing you don't want, is getting killed, and the bigger threat that's from your library going into your hand is now arriving.
There's a couple of families of cards I would like to talk about. Based off our chat about Polymorph, I'll be interested to see where this thought takes us, flavourfully. So if I say Birthing Pod, Eldritch Evolution, Evolutionary Leap, where the general idea is, if I read Birthing Pod, for example, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1+ sacrificed creatures mana cost, and put that card onto the battlefield. Eldritch Evolution and Evolutionary Leap do versions of this.
Yeah.
So, by the strictest definition of what you spoke about, Polymorph and Transmogrify, those are one creature goes for another one to come in. That's not death and resurrection. But the flavour of this is that these things are evolving.
Yeah. Past death. It took death to evolve further.
And it is... this is my point with the Polymorph and the Transmogrifier, which I think maybe I don't fully agree with you, that it is flavourfully the same matter, even if functionally it is a different creature card.
So I've got a real fly in your ointment here.
Okay.
It's a literal card, 1 green, instant, reincarnation.
That was the next one along my line.
So this undermines that because...
No, how is it? It's the follow-on from it.
Yes, so the reason it undermines this idea that it is definitely within the same idea of matter transference, but it's not one thing. So the reason this undermines it is choose target creature. When that creature dies this turn, return a creature card from its owner's graveyard to the battlefield under the control of that creature's owner. Now, the thing about that is that you can choose the same creature.
Yes.
And the fact that it requires something to die for something to come back from your graveyard, and the word obviously being reincarnation, that creature dying has caused another creature to now be alive. Whereas the other things, evolution, I think it's more trying to say that it requires this thing to die for the next big thing to come in, which more for me feels like the thing hasn't died and evolved, it's that the other thing consumes the other thing and it required...
You think it's evolution in the grander sense of, like, progress.
This thing needed to die before the next thing can evolve from it, rather than it's the life force transferring from one thing to another. It's almost like the life force growing. Or it could even be argued...
I suppose Eldritch Evolution is almost very much that, because the artwork, again, Jason Rainville artwork is... This was obviously during Shadows over Innistrad when the the Eldrazi were taking over the plane surreptitiously, is that there's a boar that's been killed by like an Eldrazi, and an Eldrazi boar is kind of like bursting out of it.
Yeah.
So
and a similar thing with Birthing Pod. You take the creature, put it in the pod, it costs that creature's life because that thing isn't able to live anymore, but it then spawns something greater. And searching a creature out from your deck feels like the same thing as like taking a card from your graveyard, but I think the reality is that you... as a mage within Magic, or within the Magic universe, you didn't have necessarily control over what that creature was going to be, unless you're like super science guy. You're like, well, if I put in this rabbit and I want it to come out as a dog, fair enough. You might be able to do whereas the Eldritch one is like Eldritch Evolution is Emrakul is transforming the world by unnatural Eldrazi processes, whether natural or unnatural. They weren't supposed to be happening, but they happen naturally. And that idea of there's this thing spawning out of the other thing, it's not that thing is now dead and can't come back again. In the game, I can very easily go, cool, cast Eldritch Evolution, also cast Brought Back. I now have the creature back that died, and I have the new creature. Yeah. That doesn't work within our little system of interrogation, I don't think. But mostly because reincarnation is right there to go, but this is how that process works.
Reincarnation is nuts. And the fact that
it's the only thing in green that does this
I kind of feel like it's a very ungreen card. Even the idea of reincarnation is like, even though reincarnation, I suppose, is part of a natural order in some belief systems, it actually I think it should absolutely be a white card.
Do you know why it's not a green card?
Because you can't have the Sue Prescott art.
It was printed in Legends.
Fuck me.
Back then, they had no idea what they were doing, Andy, man. Look at the artwork on that thing. Is he a werewolf?
Yeah, who fucking knows?
Who knows?
Is it? Oh,
reincarnation is like this beastie thing.
I could absolutely put that in my werewolf deck, that printing. Reincarnation is an incredibly underplayed gotcha card.
I agree. Yeah, the fact you can also just get that same creature back. I should be playing it in more mono green decks.
Instant speed.
If you're playing, I get Eternal Witness has a lot more coverage, and the thing is, the Eternal Witness is like, I have seen all things. So if you come to me, I can almost tell you the story of the thing that is not even here anymore, that has happened in the past.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense.
And I can bring it back into your mind, so that you as the mage now have that idea in your mind that you can recast a form of that thing again.
Yeah.
I give you the idea, the blueprint of whatever you want back into your mind, into your hands, so you can cast it again and resummon it. That's kind of how I argue Eternal Witness. If she's not actively bringing back something from the dead, she's allowing you as a mage to have the blueprint of the thing that you're bringing back from the dead.
Yeah, well, she's making that wolf out of leaves and stuff.
Yeah. Whereas reincarnation is quite literally, this thing has died, and now something else is coming back from the graveyard because of it.
There's a black-green card called Rush Rebirth from Strixhaven. That is very similar, but you get something of lesser mana value.
It's greater.
Oh, is it greater?
Because a lot of people play it in Tasiga.
Have I been playing it wrong?
And you tutor it for either Avenger of Zendikar or any other 7
Because it's in my Zeatora deck, and I think, maybe I'll use it then.
It could be 1+ or less.
Oh, sure.
But it allows you to get one more. So
it's kind of a cross between reincarnation and your birthing pods.
Basically, it's a middle ground between the two. Yeah,
it's really fucking good. Yeah. Again, the kind of death life thing that Golgari does so well.
Yeah, and the thing is, the other thing that green does, it has a couple of creatures that naturally come back for doing things. Things like the classic one's Vengevine.
Yeah.
Which sounds weird to say classic when it came out in Zendikar, but Zendikar is long enough ago that it does feel like a classic card.
Classic. I mean, 15.
I would have to click on him to find out, and I don't want to. I don't want to know how long I've been playing Magic. But the idea that when you play your second creature spell, you can return it from the graveyard. So the fact that it's like, I'm a really angry plant. If these people keep walking around, I'm going to keep coming back and fight them. And then you've also got Cameo of Transience, which whenever, at the beginning of each end step, if an enchantment was put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn, you may return it from your graveyard to your hand. Green naturally has creatures that will come back to life. Which is weird because there's a lot of black creatures that do the same thing, Reassembling Skeleton, Bloodghast being prime examples of things that can just naturally come back from the graveyard if you put a little bit of mana into them, or if something else triggers it to do so. Otherwise, they're really, really good at bringing back lands, but I don't feel like land resurrection is really the same thing.
Splendid Reclamations, all that kind of stuff.
And Aftermath Analyst, that kind of idea. Even something like Blossoming Tortoise, which brings back lands consistently one by one. It doesn't really feel like the same kind of thing.
What about... So these are mechanics that are not unique to green, but I think for some reason in my head I associate them with green. One of them is Undying with Young Wolf, but I think Undying was originally in Innistrad, so that was kind of maybe...
Yeah, and it was primarily in black, but it was the black-green kind of combined archetype. And
then the other one is, as found on Child of Gaia, from Urza Saga, Regenerate...
this is a very fly in the ointment kind of
because Regenerate, I suppose the reason, so this is what I was mentioning when green kind of has a lot of crossovers with white flavorfully, with the idea of how does it represent this kind of avoidance of death rather than coming back from the death, because as we said with white, where someone pushes you out the way of a bus and then they get squished, apologies if that's triggering for people, that was a whole fucking image I just made, but green, and I know a lot of Regenerate isn't unique to green, but I think it's a very green idea of healing, because this is a tree folk, right? This is a Child of Gaia, is a summon elemental. I suppose it's a tree folk now, but it's the idea of its arm gets axed and then it kind of all regrows and sinews back together. Is that maybe something?
So I think the problem with that comes down to the main issue why they stopped regenerating things in the first place is it creates a confusing game, not game assumption, or it creates a thought process in your mind that's false, of where you would assume that the card would go to the graveyard. You pay the cost, or you pay the cost as it would go to the graveyard. It comes back again. Instead, what it does is it creates this shield that goes, if it would go to the graveyard, instead it doesn't. Which to me feels way more like what white is doing, of going, the flavour of it. As much as I am bringing it back from the graveyard, it's more like, no, you were going to die and you're no longer dying. Yeah. Compared to black, which is you did die, it doesn't matter when you died, I'm bringing you back. Whereas Regenerate's the next moment you would die, instead of dying, you're fine, And I feel like that just crosses that line of, if it doesn't change zones, I think you kind of have to put it on the line of, it doesn't count quite as a resurrection, because it is a regeneration. The annoying thing is, it does make sense in people's minds, and as a new player, you would think that it would need to die to be able to regenerate.
Yeah.
Whereas it's the other way around of it, creates this thing of going, the next time you would die, instead you're fine, which doesn't make sense, because even in think of Wolverine. Wolverine has to take the damage first to be able to heal back.
Well, does Doctor Who die, or is he almost going to die, and then he regenerates?
I mean, the idea is that the only time he regenerates is because he would otherwise die. But I don't know if I don't know if it counts as him touching the graveyard, or if it would count as, I think it would count more as the regenerate side of things, of where the next time he would die, or will be destroyed, instead he regenerates. It's the new thing of where you go, the next time something would die, tap it and it gains indestructible, right?
You like Doctor Who?
Yeah, to a reasonable amount.
You like it more than me. Has he got unlimited regeneration?
No, you're supposed to have 13, but there was a thing that happened in the lore where he got a new round of 13 regenerations.
That's exactly the reason I don't like Doctor Who. I did not know that was the answer, and the fact that is the answer just solidifies why there's no jeopardy in that show.
Well, yeah. I mean, they kind of had to find a way to go. I mean, either that or they'd have had to follow a different person, right? And they yada yada it in a way that makes you kind of go, okay, cool, fair enough, don't worry about it. And it does have enough of it does have enough gravitas, and they do play around with the idea that the Master also had regenerations and how you get around them and how he ended up getting more, and it kind of creates this. It's a problem to solve, right? It just depends. If you don't solve it in the right way, then it seems like a silly problem. Yeah. Or if you solve it too quickly, it doesn't seem like the problem's worth it at all.
13.
Yeah.
Because when you're a human, as if there are other...
As if we weren't. Yeah, of course.
Everything in fantasy is so fucking finite. It's so 13.
7 or 13 are the great numbers.
You and I will almost definitely live to different ages. just
presumably.
mathematically.
Yeah.
So we don't sit here and we go, well, we have 90 years, and that's it. Whereas things in fantasy are like, oh, well, of course, the doctors all have 13 regenerations. You're like, how? Why can't some of them have, like, oh, he lived to a ripe old 50 regenerations?
Well, the idea being that because this has become a Doctor Who thing, because the Doctor's the timeless child and was actually not of the Gallifreyan species, and they actually took his blood and then pushed that into the other Time Lords to make the other Time Lords Time Lords. That's why maybe they have a limit on the number of regenerations they can have, is because they can only use his life essence to a finite degree, whereas potentially the timeless child could have infinite ones, and they've only presumed he has 13 because they only ever have 13. Which is funny, because it means that some of the other ones have lived longer lives to be able to know that there's only 13 regenerations than the one that's lived presumably longer. We're not doing this.
No, I'm really upset that we've got as far as we have.
Good.
I'm watching.
Stop it! No, we're not. Let's talk about magic.
I'm listening to a podcast where there's two of them, and one of them really loves ancient history, and the other one likes more like sort of 1900s, 1800s empire stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So whenever they talk about like ancient Greece, one of them is always like radically not on board, to the point where he's like, "Why? What?"
That's what we are, but for Doctor Who.
Yeah,
even though you are the one who consistently brings him up.
Yeah, because it's almost like this thing that I like. Why don't I get this? Why?
No, you're not.
I love all fandoms, and yet for some, even the ones that I should probably leave alone, and yet this I can't.
It's okay, I get it. It's the right amount of contrived in the right in the wrong.
Like
in
I'm
just
English.
the right kind of wrong
fantasy
ways.
Nerd.
Right, well, let's quickly talk about the colour combinations, because this is going to be quite quick.
Okay.
So, Azorius only really has 3, but it mostly plays around with the white side of things and bringing back artifacts, because that's kind of their little overlap. Black Blue Dimir has probably the most, outside of like Orzhov, obviously. And it's like, it's not actually that large amount, it's only like 10 or so.
Well, when we say bring something back from
it's things that typically will bring themselves back. So you've got something like the Prized Amalgam, which is Jarroth's
it's just another zombie.
Pinnacle of his whenever another creature enters the battlefield from the graveyard, the Prized Amalgam also comes out as well. And this idea of like, hey, as soon as something else comes back from the dead, I can come back from the dead too. Obsessive Stitcher is just an Innistrad Stitcher. Mirko, Obsessive Theorist. I like the idea that he's surveilling, which is studying. The stronger he gets by the more he studies, he can theoretically return things, but they come back with a finality counter because he can only create a facsimile similar to Dreams of the Dead.
Yeah.
Which was what?
Blue.
A blue card.
That cared about white and black.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. I think that was them trying to go like, hey, we're trying to make it seem like it's still a necromantic thing, whereas this is obviously a blue-black card, so the necromancy side of the black, cool, makes sense. But it's also kind of interesting to see that Mirko's changed from being a milling card that mindfucked you to being someone who's now somehow learning to resurrect, but can't do it very well because they always come back with a finality counter on them, which I think is a nice little bit of lore. You know, he's learning, he's getting there. And then you've just got a couple of other cards that can naturally come back from the graveyard by themselves. Rakdos is a little bit more erratic. You know, it has things like Cauldron Dance, of where you take a card from your hand and a card from your graveyard, you put them both into play, and then the one that was in your graveyard goes back to your hand, and the one that was in your hand goes to your graveyard.
Oh, that's cool.
Really cool.
But what?
Yeah, it's 6 mana, which is why you don't play it, but it would be quite cool in Zeotora.
That's going in Zeotora.
Yeah. You can only cast it during combat, though. That's the other thing.
I mean, so?
But very cool, right? And then you've also got something like, say, Bladewing Arisen, which turns a dragon permanent from your graveyard when it comes back to play.
Again, it's a zombie.
Naturally a zombie himself as well. Alicia obviously makes another show here with Who Laughs at Fate. Another, I don't know within. Maybe I need to study the lore of her a little bit better. But did she have because she didn't have necromantic powers per se, right? She didn't physically bring thick people back from the dead.
No, but I think like Mardu is all about like the rallying.
Yeah,
cry.
the rallying when you're because there's a couple of like there was one that's like Timely Horseman or something, and the idea is that the guy on horseback's managed to grab you at the last minute and chuck you on the horse.
Well, I think it's a very mechanical thing where obviously them being like red, white, black, and the Abzan being green, white, black. If you're playing them in like a draft or limited format, where you're trying to marry up some color combinations, because you also have like Bloodthirsty Champion, is it? Or Bloodsoaked Champion?
Yeah, that's the fact of where you draw an extra card and lose life.
Yeah,
that's Bloodsoaked Champion. Oh no, you've got the one that's 2 and a 1 that comes naturally back from the graveyard if you attacked. Yeah, that is Bloodsoaked Champion. You're right. Yeah.
So I think they have to marry them up mechanically.
Yeah, of course. I do think there is some degree of like, hey, if there are zombies on the plane, whether they're Sultai or whatever other black aligned clan they are, it kind of makes sense for them to come back. Demigod of Revenge is like the original. Well, not say the original, but definitely for me an iconic resurrection card. You know, it's 5 hybrid black-red mana for flying haste 5/4. When you cast it, return all other cards named Demigod of Revenge from the graveyard to the battlefield. This idea that, you know, the anger and the fury that red-black combines, you know, brings things back from the dead naturally anyway. You've got Sinister Waltz, which is just a kind of twist on Macabre Waltz, where it choose 3 creature cards from your graveyard. 2 of them at random get put into the battlefield, and the rest is on the other one's on the bottom of your library, which is quite efficient. And then the last one being Wake to Slaughter, 5 mana, choose 2 creature cards in your graveyard. Your opponent chooses one of them goes to your hand, one of them goes into play, and you exile at the beginning of the next end step. So a bit more erratic, a little bit more crazed. You know, this idea of once black's adding in some red mana to its colour pie, it starts to get a little bit less controlled and focused, and it starts to become a little bit more speedy. There's only a few in Selesnya. The 2 that I think are specifically quite good to look at are Safi Eriksdotter, which is the very pinnacle of just before something is dying, save it, but it does need the thing to die. So you sacrifice Safi Eriksdotter. When target creature is put into the graveyard this turn, return that card to the battlefield. Now that is the pinnacle of all of these white spells, like Brought Back, Face Reward, that kind of effect, of where any other time they've gone like, you know, at the last minute or against all odds, it should be things that when something is going to die, as soon as it does die, it comes back because you're saving it from the jaws of death instead of being able to go, hey, because it's not like Safi goes, put any creature that died this turn. You need to do it in response to something dying in the moment. Compare that to Ulthelm, Sigarden Outcast, which is the in-world universe version of the Selesnya Stranger Things person. Which one was this one?
I know that it's Kylar was the in-universe version of that.
I can't remember. Yeah, anyway, but so the Sigarden Outcast 2/2 for 2 mana tap, choose target creature put into your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn, return that to the battlefield tapped. Similar to Safi Eriksdotter, but you can do it on any creature that has died in that particular turn. That idea of this thing has just died, I can bring them back. Markedly on the card, he's bringing them back as a ghost.
Yeah.
Rather than bringing them back as a real life thing. Again, that's a whole other wibbly wobbly thing when it comes to magic, magic expression. Orzhov has the most, as I said before, and none of them feel particularly out of character. Like, they're actually slightly less generic. I'd expect there to be a more generic thing, like similar to Immortal Servitude. X, Orzhov Hybrid, Orzhov Hybrid, Orzhov Hybrid. Return each creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Like, a modal mass reanimation spell does feel very white. A lot of the other ones are things like Greasefang, or Magister of Worth, things that have a very particular return a certain type of thing from the graveyard.
That's such a cool card.
You know, and then you've got also things like Aura, Skylove Hierophant, which does that thing of whenever you have a cleric die, you return another cleric that has lower mana cost. Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, returning all legendary permanent cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. They tend to have big sweeping effects, but they tend to be a slightly more focused, which is interesting because I'd expect you put those two colours together and become a more generic effect than a more focused effect. But, you know, there's that. Golgari does much more of less than I thought. I thought Golgari would have a lot more. You know, you think of things like Merin, you think of things like Journey to Eternity, and you think there's probably a lot more that are out there. There aren't actually that many Golgari return to the battlefield effects.
No, but I think we're, because you're focusing very much on like that mechanic of like get something back from the graveyard, but I think the tone and the flavour of the thing that we're talking about is very much present in Golgari.
Yeah, a lot more. And it does a lot more of return to the hand rather than the play, because that's obviously, in terms of efficiency, a little bit easier to put on a bunch of cards. Putting a bunch of things that return things from the graveyard to play can get quite dangerous when creatures are really easily put into the graveyard, you know, not necessarily from the battlefield but from other forms as well. Life Death being the probably most predominant one, and this is only because the death side of things, weirdly enough, brings things back from the dead. 1 and a black, it does reanimate, return creature card from your graveyard, not anyone's graveyard. You lose life equal to its mana value. The life side just makes all of your lands into 1/1s, which kind of undermines my point a little bit. Otherwise, Squaring Emergence is another example of something that just brings something directly back from the graveyard. Boros only does it a little bit. You've got Tiana, Ship's Caretaker, that returns auras or equipments from your graveyard to the battlefield. Interestingly enough, she is an Angel Artificer, so it's the combination of being able to rebuild things, but also the combination of white mana being able to bring things back from the dead as well.
Yeah, she was the sort of second generation Weatherlight crew engineer. Yeah, she was cool, very cool.
Nothing
character.
is too broken to mend, and that's such a kind of that's the perfect middle ground between red and white when it comes to resurrecting things. It's not about bringing something back to life, it's about rebuilding something that is broken. And that idea that life being broken, in a world of magic, where your life force can probably sit in whatever of the 4 different spirit afterlife things your plane happens to engage with at this particular time, cool, I can get your soul back.
Yeah.
You know, all it is that your body's a little broken. And I'm a red mage and a white mage, so I understand life force magic and I know how to rebuild things. So, of course, why wouldn't I be able to rebuild a body?
Yeah.
You know, think about Goblin Chirurgeon. Like, that's a 1-drop goblin. Pay 0, sack a goblin to regenerate any goblin. He's like the original Giralf.
Yeah.
You know, and in the artwork, it's even got some random tiger arms and an elf head. I think it's like the original Llanowar elves head. And the idea is he is just going, I piece back to goblins together from other goblins.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly dark when you think about it, and it's on a random red spell. You know, and again, this idea of regenerating, then kind of straying into the same kind of realm that blue mages would do, of where you reconstruct a body and then put science through it to bring it back to life. You've also got Gerard Weatherlight Hero, the Dominaria. Oh, where did it originally come out? It came in the Dominaria Masters. Yeah, Commander 2019 is when it originally came out. When he dies, exile it and return to the battlefield all artifact and creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. He's the big hero of the story.
Yeah.
Last minute, he sacrifices self to save everybody else. To save everybody else doesn't mean that these people all were going to die and now they're not going to. Within the game piece, they did all die, and then he brings them back. Again, we're having to muddy the lines of mechanical expression.
We're just trying to give things the benefit of the fucking doubt.
Yeah, right. And kind of you just have to make it worth. And you've also got things like Wake the Past or Campus Renovation, things that actively bring back artifacts and enchantments from your graveyards.
Well, isn't that interesting now? Like, if you look at Lorehold,
both Lorehold spells.
Yeah, exactly. If you look at Lorehold in Strixhaven, they're not necessarily reincarnating or resurrecting or necromanting in the way that they're like. The energy of the spirits that they're calling forth sort of exists within the things that they find.
Yeah. Well, to quote Campus Renovation, reconstructing the past is Lorehold's specialty. It's not just bringing things back from the dead, it's going and finding the place where these things are still lying, still dormant, still technically alive in some form, and then discovering them, digging them up and putting them back together so they can continue to live. Rather than going, cool, let's go and dig up Auntie Myra. It's like, no, wherever her spirit happens to reside, you know, within whatever rock formation or whatever, let's go and find that and then reintroduce it back into our society.
Yeah.
We then have, I said before, we had 1 Gruul card.
Oh, God, there are too many colour combinations.
Yeah, which only had 1 card and we ignore it because it doesn't do anything important. And then we also only have 1 Simic card, Slowgurk the Overslime, that only returns itself, so we're going to ignore that as well.
Because there's a slime more than it is anything else.
And then shockingly enough, of the 3 colour combination, Orzhov has a fair few, like 5 or 6. No particular combination has more than that, really, and they're all just like things like, you know, Croxer and Kuranos. Of course, one of them is in the in Nyx, the other one is like the protector of Nyx. Of course, they're going to bring back things across the threshold. We haven't even talked about, say, for example, Athreos. This idea of when things die, you give your opponent a choice, and then it returns back to your hand. Is that resurrecting?
Well, again, how do you square form and function? Because, like, compared to other things that we've spoken about today, but also no, because it's Theros and their afterlife you're not gone.
Is way more transient, exactly. Yeah. So this is it's funny how you have nailed it, because we haven't really talked about that per se, but different planes treat death differently and treat what being dead can mean and what other forms it can mean. So it does kind of change then which cards represent resurrection. Like on Dominaria, Gravedigger is quite literally a card of where the guy is going and digging up a grave. We don't know whether that's for nefarious purposes or not, but he's not actually giving you the creature back alive. He's just giving you the creature back. Is that the difference?
Yeah.
If the creature goes back to your hand, are you just getting the body, and it's up to you to remagify it and put it bagive on the battlefields? Yeah. And then if it's coming onto the battlefield, does it come back alive and already, you know, full of vim?
Maybe. I think it's like you give your mate a Lego set. You give them like your Millennium Falcon that you built for them to kind of display, and then they give you back a box with all the bits in it, and they're like, well, you know how to do it, so like...
Yeah, I got it back for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas maybe, White Magic goes, oh, no, I rebuilt it for you as well.
Yeah, I glued it in place.
Yeah, whoa.
So, I think we hit time.
Yeah. there's not really much. I mean, apart from artifacts, which we've already covered anyway. That's it. That's all the different colour combinations. I don't give a shit. Yeah. No, we're fine.
who fucking claims that artifacts are their favourite colour of Magic? No one. And if you do, you're a fucking tryhard.
You're a liar.
You're a liar. Tell us if colourless is your favourite colour, and call us out on our bullshit at mtflavouring on bluesky.social.sky.blue.com. Twitter.
Good.
Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. You can find us on the Twitters. Tell a friend about this podcast. We do have the YouTube channel. Do check out the YouTube channel.
We will eventually start putting more stuff.
Yeah, we'll put more stuff on it. Whatever, it's there. But like, I looked at our engagements and our impressions and all those kind of stats, and for whatever reason, we do all right because there's Magic YouTube is big, right? But the impressions we got for our Dragonstorm story review was like plus 400%. And wow. I looked at the timeline for like the past year, and it's like flat, boom for 2 days in March, flat. Whatever I don't understand the algorithm.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend to understand the algorithm. It's like I don't want to know.
We caught lightning in a bottle
for that one episode.
Yeah. Hey, maybe it's a good sign that people still really care about the story. And also, it was a story that I think people went into being like, oh, this isn't going to be very good. And it actually ended up being a really strong story. So then maybe that's the engagement of people wanted to see what other people thought of it.
The professor from Tolarian Community College does those don't buy this, buy the singles instead, as a playful like, oh, the set's shit, buy the singles, because it's just the clickbait, right, for the thumbnail. And this is I think it's the first time where he's done absolutely buy this set and also these singles out of it, and that's the thumbnail. I'm like, oh, this set's getting. And also, I think it's the last bastion of like, this set has to sell, otherwise it's all Universes Beyond.
Yeah, I wanted to really not care about that, about Dragonstorms of Tarkir, but mostly because it's annoying. Because of all the planes, like I've already said this before, I don't really find the whole dragons to be super engaging.
I love that period of history though.
But I'm really glad that it was, as you say, like the last in universe that feels like old school Magic, because Edges of Eternity, is in universe set, but it feels so different to everything we've had before. It might as well be a Universes Beyond the set.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet. Not the country Tibet, which is quite relevant for talking about Target. I'm willing to bet that actually it's going to feel more familiar than we think. I think from some of the artwork, like they have angels and shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, let us know about all this on our socials.
Yeah, we'll get around to that when it happens.
Later this year, after SpongeBob. Tune in for our SpongeBob SquarePants story review. We're going to watch all 50 seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants.
You know what? That sounds like fun.
Oh dear God! Thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.